Any other pointed questions? Like specific things?
I got one for our contracting, but I want to leave it for our contracting discussion.
Okay. Well, let's move into that, and then we can continue on to discuss the app if it comes up. So last time we left our conversation on consulting, it was really, like I said, we were talking about how do you get clients or how do you invoice them. So more of the administrative conversations and stuff like that. So in this one, we were going to start out with working with clients and doing war stories and stuff like that. So where we left off was the question of how do you communicate with clients and how often. Now I know Ed has very specific views on this, but anyone on the panel have something they want to share around that? Ed?
Communication is the key factor for doing any type of consulting. We have to have solid communication with the client, or the client's going to get frustrated, you're going to get frustrated. It is all about the conversation that occurs. So regular communication is needed, but you've got to do it on your terms. That it's a careful balance. If they're not hearing from you, they think nothing's happening. But at the same time, you can't be constantly communicating with them to such a point that you're not getting anything else done. So it is a very careful balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, some clients want to meet like once a week or once every 2 weeks, and there's a point there where you're like, well.
And I prefer once every 2 weeks, but with emails in between. I'll Skype once every 2 weeks. I don't like to go more often than that because Skyping does take up a lot of your time. Whereas I can send out an email that takes me 10 minutes to do. Skype meetings seem to go on forever.
Yeah. I hate talking over Skype, and I keep Skype turned off for the majority of time.
So if I heard you correctly, Sergey, you limit your client's ability to access you out of the blue by keeping Skype off.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. Email is the preferable way of conversation.
Yeah. So I want to go back to what Brian just said. You said you like to communicate every 2 weeks. I typically like to communicate
by Skype.
No more than once a week.
By Skype.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Start again. I don't mean offline communications. I mean direct communications via Skype or whatever method you've chosen to.
And of course, I'm referring to large projects that are going to be going on for multiple weeks of work. Short projects, hopefully just crank it out, get it done, and move on.
Okay. What about you, Sergey? How often do you meet, actually speak, Skype, whatever, with your clients?
Well, usually if they insist on. So if they insist, I do. If they don't, I don't. And another point against Skype is that whatever you say on Skype is not recorded. So if you agree on something on Skype and then you find out later they thought something else, you can't prove your words because it's not recorded. While if it have been emails, you would have exactly what they said.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I do tell my clients not just that there's nothing that we're going to agree upon in Skype that is fixed. It's got to be sent via email or some other.
Yeah, I find that every Skype meeting inevitably ends with an email as well, or else, like Sergey said, you just lose track of what was agreed upon.
Yeah.
What about clients that are the opposite? The ones that they're hard to get a hold of. How do you guys handle those?
I've never had a client that didn't want to talk.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's never been a problem.
I find that they fall into different classes, and one class of client is they're very adamant about you getting whatever it is that you're supposed to get done. But then when you will go and ask them for something, they will tend to come back and you'll have to follow it with a couple of times, and then when they finally get to you, let's say it's gone a couple of weeks, and they finally get back to you on what they're supposed to do, and then they expect a result to be within a couple of days of them providing whatever it took them 2 weeks to get you. So
yeah,
they're not all like
that.
that.
There are a few those clients like my students. If they're slow to turn stuff in, I'm slow to grade.
Yeah, that's stressful though. I hear what you're saying, Charles. Generally, those kind of clients don't pass my first communication test.
Right.
and then I don't accept them. But it's not always true. For example, one thing that has happened to me is I've had a client where I start off working with one person, everything's good, and then they change who I work with, and then it does not go well. So, and how one deals with that?
Contact?
Yeah, well, a different person on the team is taking over communications and delivery of items that I need to do the work, and it just falls apart. So, yeah, and I don't have a good way of dealing with that yet. Anybody?
It's tough. I guess as a as someone who's getting hired for contract, you need to always make sure that the ball is on the other side of the court. Just because I guess you don't want people pointing fingers at you. I mean, Davi and I, we were doing contract for such a long time. We've had moments where, we had to work with a back-end team, and there was just not enough communication. And so, at certain times, it's like, okay, well, it's not working. What's going on? And because of the lack of communication, things got confused. And then that was always awkward and uncomfortable. So we learned that, it's always good to sort of keep the communication line open and make sure that everybody's well aware of what's going on. I think that's sort of the best way to approach it, because then especially when you have that history of emails, you sort of protect yourself from anything.
Yeah, but it's very hard to explain to a client why they're wrong. Even when you have it documented.
If you have a big team, many people working on one application, it's wise to set up something like Slack, where you communicate in IRC-like matter, but everything gets saved like emails.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that. Not IRC necessarily, but part of the question here earlier was where Charles alluded to me having specific opinions. One thing that I've encountered working with different clients is all the different clients I've worked with seem to want to do things differently. Some want to use Dropbox, some want to use Box. They have like different ways they want to give you the information. I try to force my clients to use the method that I prefer first, so I nicely encourage them to do so. But at the end of the day, I always try to limit the avenues for data to come in. So yes, we'll Skype to have our meetings, but emails for delivering documents, or we're going to use a fixed GitHub to deliver documents, or we're going to do something that we agree upon, so it's always the same way. I've had clients in the past that sometimes they want to use Dropbox, and the next week they want to change to use something else, and I can never find all the content. FTP this week, like, oh, okay, no, this is not working, because I don't know what the latest content is. I don't know who emailed me last or who updated these documents last. It gets a little bit out of control.
When I get a big project, I set up a folder at a special place on Google Drive for this specific project, and if it has many links, I usually put all the links in some files that I can access from, and like Bitbucket, like GitHub, like, I don't know, emails, login passwords for iTunes and other stuff. That's the most important stuff. Usually you have to search through emails to get back to them, but once they are all in one place, in one file, it's much easier to work.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the next question here, and it says, has a client ever asked you to do something that you couldn't do in Corona, and how did you handle it? So that assumes a little bit of that everybody here has done their contract work in Corona, but let's just say, has a client have ever asked you to do something outside of your comfort zone? So like if you're like, they want you to do something in iOS specifically, in Objective-C, and you're like, well, I'm not an Objective-C developer. So how do you handle that?
Well, I guess I can share an opinion. I mean, I think you have to be very deliberate in what you choose to work on, and you have to be very honest with your clients, because it's always going to come through during the work or down the road or whatever, if you're not ready to handle something or do something else. We've definitely had clients request. We were with one group for a significant amount of time, and we were sort of their prototyping lab. You know, they weren't fixed on a product yet, but they wanted to try ideas out, and they wanted to, you know, test and prototype usability design and all that. So we were able to use Corona, and you know, there were things that we just had to tell them, like, we can't actually test this. And then, funny enough, a lot of times these features would get added to Corona, and we'd be like, okay, yeah, now we can do this. It's okay.
Yeah, I've had that exact experience. They've said, hey, can you put this in? I said, no, Corona doesn't support it. Next week it does. I'm like, oh, hey, it supports it now.